Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Outrageous Misfits, female impersonator Craig Russell and his wife, Lori Russell Eadie, by Brian Bradley. Narrated by Brian Bradley. For my outrageous sister Jocelyn, and for anyone who has ever struggled, you are seen, you are understood, you are loved. You're mad as a hatter, darling, but that's all right, because so am I. So am I. I've never known anyone worth knowing who wasn't a positive fruitcake. Craig Russell as character Robin Turner in Outrageous. Author's note. This biography about Russell Craig Eadie, Craig Russell, and Lori Jenkins Russell Eadie touches on 60 years of gay history in Toronto with a particular emphasis on the Toronto gay community from the 1960s through to the 1980s. Much has changed in that time, including our understanding and acknowledgement of gender and sexual identities. Everyone has a place in the history highlighted in this book, but to be true to the gay community as it was understood in Craig and Lori's time, this text mostly identifies gay and lesbian people in respect to historical events and venues I have cited. You will also note that I have used the broad term gay community. Do not confuse this to mean a community of gay males. In the context of this history, the term gay community includes people of all gender and sexual identities and their allies. To me and my book subjects, we all have a place within it. Preface. This is a biography about a man who grew up wanting to be a star and his number one fan, a woman who later became his wife. It sounds like a familiar setup, a relationship between a man and a woman that is relatable, even predictable. But a lot is different about the stories of this particular man and woman, and you might come to the conclusion that these two people are unlike anyone you have ever known. Craig Eadie, better known as Craig Russell, and Lori Jenkins Russell Eadie had similar backgrounds and interests. They grew up and built their careers in Toronto. They loved the arts, the rush of performance, the thrill of curtain call, and the adulation of an audience. Craig made his living performing on the stage and dabbling in film and television. Lori worked in theater too, but she preferred life backstage in the land of wardrobe, where she was a dresser for some of the most highly touted theatrical productions in Canadian theater history. Craig's career was built from a teenage love of great dame female entertainers like Judy Garland, Marlene Dietrich, Tallulah Bankhead, and Bette Davis. Sexpot actress Mae West was his idol, and, as president of his initially fake Mae West fan club, he went to work as her personal secretary in California. Who gets to do something like that? Craig did. He was charmed in a way, and larger than life. He was destined to be on stage and with the stars. His art fits into the world of drag, but Craig insisted he was not a drag queen. He was a female impressionist. He was really good at what he did. He was an excellent singer, and his comedy had perfect timing. His impressions were so finely tuned, he imitated gestures down to the wiggle of a pinky finger, the wink of an eye, or the flick of a cigarette. One reviewer said he was able to stir an audience the way the ladies themselves did or do. Another said that no one could handle the big ladies of stage and screen so well. All you have to do is sit there, sip your suds, and pick your lower jaw off the floor every now and then. Eventually joined by some of the best musicians from Canada, the United States, and Germany, Craig toured the world impersonating the ladies he loved and played in some of the grandest venues for audiences who never would have given such a queer man the time of day outside of a theater. His talent gave him a key to the mainstream entertainment world from which his beloved entertainers came. He went on to star in a movie credited as a groundbreaking film for gay culture and a force that pushed the Canadian film scene forward. I was 13 years old, incredibly naive, and living in a small francophone community outside Sudbury, Ontario, when I first heard the name Craig Russell. I was watching something rather bland on television, and all of a sudden this colorful, flamboyant man was mentioned in a commercial promoting a documentary. I remember it so clearly. His coiffed hair and makeup, talk of a friendship with actress Mae West, brazen footage of him singing in a wig and gown, and mention that self-confidence eluded him despite his incredible success. I had immediate questions. Who was this effeminate man in makeup? Was he a crossdresser? He lived with an old lady movie star? And he got to make a movie? Why did he get to do things like this? Craig was like no one I'd ever known. I figure he was likely gay. I didn't know any gay people, nor did I see any in the television shows or movies I watched. Was this what gay men were like? I was skeptical, wondering why there'd be a documentary about someone like that and why it was worth talking about. I had so much to learn about the world. A decade later, I was a journalism graduate with an interest in social history and biography when Craig's name crossed my path again. I was researching Margaret Gibson, a celebrated writer who suffered from schizophrenia, and an article about her mentioned Craig. They had been friends and roommates. I wondered what that could have been like. I looked up one of their shared friends in the phone book and called her up, telling her I had an interest in both Margaret, the writer who struggled with what she called madness, and Craig, the flamboyant female impressionist who seemed so unrecognized and misunderstood. I got more than I bargained for. That conversation spawned so much intrigue that I spent the next decade of my life researching and learning about Craig. Initially, it was a hobby, but by 2017, my efforts were full-time, and I knew there was a book to be written about his life. His story had talents to be celebrated, intrigues to be understood, and curious situations to be explained. In learning about Craig, I came to learn about Laurie, a shy and demure, theater-loving file clerk who joined his world of make-believe and became his wife. What a turn of events that must have been for her. Who gets to marry their favorite movie star? How did that happen? What was their marriage like? I had to know. I became just as enamored with Laurie as I was with Craig, and a biography about one became a biography about two. And what lives they lived. As if they weren't both outrageous and interesting enough, Craig and Laurie's life and their careers coincided with gay liberation. In the years after the Stonewall riots in the United States, Toronto had its first annual Gay Pride Week, gay bars quietly opened along Yonge Street, the local drag scene began to take shape, and there was a push to include sexual orientation in the Ontario Human Rights Code. The atmosphere was as motivating as it was frightening. Police raided bathhouses, and homophobic thugs lurked around parks and protests. Numerous men turned up murdered after frequenting popular gay establishments. Craig and Laurie were not necessarily politically engaged in the changing times, but they shared the notion they could do as they pleased with no apologies or regrets. They defied gender conventions and eschewed the heteronormative. Their lives and careers blossomed at the beginning of the throbbing sexual revolution and the new wave counterculture brought to the stage, radio, television, and film by icons like David Bowie, Freddie Mercury, Carol Pope, and Boy George. Craig and Laurie were strange people, square pegs in a world of round holes. Unusual, misfits. That is a challenging existence, but their challenges did not stop there. Few people knew it, but Craig's life was gripped by mental illness. Mental health was not only poorly understood when he was alive, it simply was not a conversation that was had. Craig self-medicated, and his choice of cocaine led to years of drug dependency. There wasn't a conversation about addiction then either. It was a vicious cycle from which he could not recover. Laurie faced her own traumas. She had a physically and emotionally abusive parent, was a survivor of rape, and suffered multiple accidents that broke her body and took from her spirit. Suffering from his own mental illness, Craig was at times abusive too. Laurie never realized she was a victim of abuse, nor did she see that, in her dependency, she was an enabler, and her behavior demonstrated an unhealthy obsession with Craig. Few knew about their challenges, and in time, friends, fans, and even some family came to look at both of them with raised eyebrows. Opinions and reactions to their outlandish behavior shifted from delightful curiosity to confusion and embarrassment. That judgment compounded Craig's and Laurie's challenges, putting another ceiling over them that they could not break through, even after having seemingly broken through every possible barrier. What people missed is this. And outrageous and nonconformist as they were, Craig and Laurie were just like you and me. They were two vulnerable, sensitive people who yearned for love and belonging. For a while, I thought that must be why I was driven to learn about them. I could relate to those sentiments. But then I realized that love and a sense of belonging are things we all need and crave, no matter who we are or where we come from. Research for this book included nearly 100 interviews, the reviewing of books, movies, audio tapes, letters, and promotional materials, and countless news and feature articles from Canada, the United States, Germany, and the Netherlands. I shared coffee and meals with Craig's and Laurie's family and friends, reviewed family photo albums and scrapbooks, listened to their favorite music, toured one of Toronto's greatest theaters with 2 backstage crew members, danced and sang along at drag shows in the gay village, and went to performances by some of their favorite musicians. I even got a lesson in cosmetics from Craig's young cousin, a professional makeup artist who shares Craig's passion for theater and transformation. I was blessed to receive journals, day planners, and an unpublished manuscript belonging to Laurie, which were of great insight and allowed me to speak clearly about her feelings, impressions, and experiences. Craig was a little harder. Half the time he spoke in character as one of his ladies, and he hid his emotions behind his impressions. But through meaningful interviews with people who knew him and corroboration with other sources, I feel comfortable speaking for him. I feel I knew Craig and Laurie. I have written of their lives and experiences as I understand them. This book is meant to acknowledge the wonderful aspects of Craig's and Laurie's lives, identify their strengths, and celebrate their successes. It can't be denied that they made mistakes around every success they enjoyed, dealing with crushing challenges that haunted and hindered them more than anyone realized. But there is a humanity to be recognized where we fall. I have done that here. Craig's and Laurie's difficulties are an equal part of the story of the lives of two people who can only be described as outrageous misfits, who, at face value, seem so unusual and different, but in reality could not have been more relatable. Chapter 1. All of Me. Laurie Jenkins had planned a way to meet Craig Russell for weeks. It was February 1978, and Craig was set to be a guest at a concert at the hip and happening Elmo Combo Club on Spadina Avenue in Toronto. Laurie dropped everything to go. At last she could meet the man she adored. It was a great opportunity to show him the tapestry she had made of his likeness. Maybe she could give it to him. At the very least, she could tell him how much she loved him. Laurie was a high school student with a love for the drama club when she first heard about Craig Russell, an impressionist of Hollywood's greatest female entertainers. Craig was making a name for himself in the world then, taking his one-of-a-kind act on the road with a packed touring schedule across North America, Europe, and the United Kingdom. He also had a starring role in the just-released, critically acclaimed film Outrageous. He'd come a long way from his Mae West fan club and Toronto drag show days. Laurie was hooked before she even saw him perform. When a project came up in Laurie's art class, she chose Craig as her subject. She spent weeks carefully sewing a tapestry of Craig as Mae West, Barbra Streisand, and Carol Channing, using colorful thread, feathers, sequins, and rhinestones. She called it All About Craig, a play on the title of the film All About Eve. Laurie was so proud of the final product that she had her brother take photos on slide film before she submitted the tapestry to be included in a student installation downtown. Laurie loved the whole entertainment scene, art, drama, and music, but preferred live theater. It didn't matter to her whether it was gay or straight, and she did not discriminate in her choice of venues. She saw A Chorus Line at the Royal Alexandra Theatre, David Bowie at Maple Leaf Gardens, Shirley MacLaine at the O'Keefe Centre, and B.B. King at the Ontario Place Forum. Café des Copains was her favorite cabaret theatre, and Club David's was her favorite disco. When she wasn't out at a venue somewhere downtown, Laurie loved to watch popular talk shows hosted by Alan Hamill and Brian Linehan to see the biggest stars. She liked the interviews so much that she'd make notes about them in her journal. She wrote most of her entries backwards. It was an act of defiance to her mother, who always told her she was backwards. When Laurie liked an entertainer, she would be consumed. Case in point, when she first saw entertainer Peter Allen on Linehan's interview show City Lights, she ran out to Sam the Record Man's flagship store on Yonge Street to buy all of his albums. Laurie listened to them, all of them, in time to see him at the Colonial Tavern Jazz Club, where she made a request for a song she already knew from memory. Peter's flamboyant persona was right up Laurie's alley. She preferred versatile performers who could sing, act, and be funny, but were also seductive and had vibrant sexualities that teased at gender norms and sexual identity. She loved Freddie Mercury and David Bowie. Laurie was elusive when it came to her own sexuality. A part of her was shy. A part of her liked to keep people guessing. More than any other art form, Laurie loved female impersonators, now better known as drag queens. Drag was thriving in Toronto in the 1960s and 1970s. The St. Charles Tavern, the Manatee, Club 511, and the August Club were popular gay clubs that featured drag on their stages. In clubs that accepted female patrons, Laurie saw shows by Canadian drag queens Michelle Dubarry, Georgie Girl, Jackie Loren, Michelle Ross, Murray Cooper, Ronnie Holiday, Danny Love, and Rusty Ryan as they were building their careers. She did not see drag as a novelty or something only gay men did. She respected it as an art form, and put drag performers on the same pedestal as other more mainstream entertainers. The Elmo combo was drag-friendly, too. It was a hotspot in Toronto in those days. The Elmo was popular among the younger generation who wanted rock and roll when other clubs played disco. Blondie, the Ramones, and Joan Jett played there. The Rolling Stones recorded part of their Love You Live album there in 1977 and made headlines when they partied there with Margaret Trudeau, wife of then-Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Laurie was no stranger to the Elmo either, and on February 15, 1978, Peter Allen was on the bill. With Craig rumored to be a special guest, Laurie arrived at the venue early, took a table near the stage, and kept her eyes peeled for him. She was so excited she was almost giddy. This was it. This was her chance. Craig was excited to go too, but for different reasons. An appearance at the Elmo was a great opportunity for the self-professed promosexual to get another mention in newspapers ahead of his planned engagement at the Royal York Hotel later that month. He headed to the club ahead of showtime, entourage in tow, hoping to see reporters he knew. But the first person who spotted him was Laurie. Not missing a beat, she zipped over to his table, squeezed by his bodyguard, and in one breath introduced herself and gave him a photo slide of her All About Craig tapestry. She told him she was his biggest fan, explained her artwork with pride, and said she wanted him to have it. Craig took the sudden demand for his attention in stride. He met fans often and was used to having them around at events and parties. He took some time with most, and he often invited them to hang around and go on to the next venue with him. He was no different with Laurie, but since their time was short, he suggested they exchange phone numbers. Craig did not have any added interest in this particular fan. He was not attracted to her and was not looking to take her to bed. Laurie did not stand out in that way. She was soap and water beautiful. She was plainly dressed, a little masculine, and she didn't look femme at all. She fit right in with the popular androgynous look of the time. Her beauty came out in her adoration and enthusiasm. When she was excited, she beamed. To Laurie, all that mattered was this moment. She was obsessed with Craig, just as Craig had been obsessed with his own idol, Mae West. Laurie's entire sense of self-worth at that time was tied to the fact that this movie star seemed to want to get to know her. Craig wants the tapestry, she thought. He wants to get to know me. She was so thrilled that she documented the exchange in her journal with little mention of Peter Allen's concert at the Elmo that night. Meeting her star was the highlight of her day, her week, and her year. Her world had changed. Laurie never did reach Craig by phone to arrange the handing over of her gift. Undeterred, Laurie got in touch with his mother, Norma Hurst, and asked to come over for tea. Norma agreed, and a week later, Laurie excitedly handed over her tapestry and talked Norma's ear off. Norma was touched by the gesture, but she found the whole exchange odd. She gave the tapestry to her sister Catherine, who, like Laurie, documented everything she could about Craig's career. Laurie met Craig again 5 months later in July 1978, when Outrageous screened at the New Yorker Theater, now the CAA Theater on Yonge Street. Craig was away performing in the United States when the film premiered at the 1977 Festival of Festivals in Toronto, so the red carpet was rolled out again for a flashy screening. True to form, Laurie knew Craig would be there. She sat through 3 screenings of the film before he arrived for the 4th. The energy at the New Yorker couldn't have been higher. Craig arrived with Canadian actress Barbara Hamilton on his arm and an entourage of people around him, including bandmates and a scattering of his family, friends, and fans. Photographer David Street trailed him too, snapping away with his camera. This star knew how to arrive. Just as she had at the Elmo, Laurie took notice of Craig's arrival right away, squeezed to the front of the crowd, handed him a new photo of the tapestry, and asked for his autograph. As Craig signed for her, David called for his attention, and the two of them looked up as he snapped yet another shot. David published a photo collection on Craig the next year. The photo with Laurie is included, forever capturing the moment. Craig and Laurie entered the theater separately, but by happenstance were seated close together. As a VIP, Craig was treated to chocolate, strawberries, and champagne. And taking notice of the close proximity of his self-professed #1 fan, he slipped the treats to her throughout the film. She was delighted, easy to please. He liked this enthusiasm. He also couldn't help but notice she had memorized his lines from beginning to end. Smitten, Laurie followed Craig after the screening to the flashy Club Wonder Bar down the block, where he and his entourage were celebrating. Laurie and Craig picked up their conversation and talked about the tapestry, his performances, and Outrageous. Craig was in a casual, celebratory mood. The movie was rocketing him to superstar status. Laurie was increasingly intense. She couldn't help it. She told him flat out that she loved him. "Wait until we get away from all the bullshit and we get to know each other better," he told her, apprehensive but intrigued. Craig loved to be loved. Not only had he worked hard in his career and felt he'd earned that adoration, but also the fact that this stranger professed to love him temporarily filled a longing that he worked to hide. He didn't often feel loved, even in the presence of family, friends, and crowds of people. It was part of a mental illness he didn't have words to explain. Laurie kept on with her theater-loving life through the next 3 years. She worked an administrative job by day and spent her evenings and weekends in cinemas, theaters, and clubs. She went to see everyone from Peter Donato to Cher to Diana Ross. She also kept up her adoration of Craig and his work. She would eventually see Outrageous more than 30 times. She watched and recorded all his TV appearances and kept a book of newspaper clippings. She sent him fan letters. They were written backwards, just like her journal entries. They didn't meet when Craig returned to Toronto in December 1978 to perform at Massey Hall, but Laurie made sure to be there. She shouted, "Bravo! Bravo!" so loudly from her seat that he could hear her from the stage. Laurie borrowed a 35mm camera with telephoto lens for the show and took 72 shots of him performing. She was so excited to see the end result that she tried to develop the film herself, even though she didn't really know how. Craig was all over the world in those years. In addition to a packed touring schedule from Las Vegas to London to Sydney, he had countless TV appearances and charity performances with almost constant coverage in newspapers and magazines. One day he'd be performing in a television special. The next he'd be at a children's hospital charity auction. He was everywhere. He had 2 more runs at the Imperial Room in Toronto's Royal York Hotel, and in May 1981 he was set to be a star in a theater production called Hogtown at the Bayview Playhouse Theater. It was his first play. Craig was good in his role, but his relationships with the producer, director, and musical director and other cast members were rocky, making Laurie a welcome reprieve when she reintroduced herself. It didn't take long. She had tickets for all preview performances and every weekend performance once it opened. Now in need of a friend, Craig invited Laurie for drinks at his aunt's midtown apartment where he was staying. He was grateful to have an ally and pulled out all the stops to impress her. He made them rum and cokes, showed her a fan letter she had sent him, and pulled out the now infamous tapestry. He then played her German actress and singer Marlene Dietrich's rendition of the song, "I Wish You Love." As Marlene sang the sweet lyrics, Laurie started to cry. Her emotions were as fragile as they were intense. It wasn't just the song that was getting to her. It was time with her star. "I've never heard the song before in my life, and here I am beside my idol, listening to a love song," she thought to herself. "I can't believe my fortune in being invited over by Craig." Laurie must have been quite the sight. When his aunt arrived and introductions were made, she asked if Laurie was on drugs. Craig and Laurie chatted about Hogtown and his planned summer engagements. He told her he needed a dresser to manage his wardrobe and assist him before and during his performances. It wasn't exactly a job offer, but Laurie jumped at the idea and offered her services. So what if she didn't have any formal training in wardrobe? She wanted nothing more than to be around Craig all the time. Craig agreed they could give it a try, but cautioned her on one point. If their working relationship was going to succeed, she would have to be more assertive. Assertive? Really? It was an odd piece of feedback considering the lengths she had gone to in order to meet and get to know him, but Laurie nonetheless took it to heart. The following Sunday, Laurie arrived at the Bayview Playhouse Theater ahead of the afternoon performance, even though she wasn't expected until the evening show. She was ready to work, and walked in with the attitude that she belonged there and had been part of it all along. When Craig inquired about her unexpected arrival, she held her ground. "I'm trying to be more assertive," she said proudly and matter-of-factly. Craig was amused. He had his dresser. Through the rest of the play's run, he taught Laurie all about his characters and impressions, how to maintain and set his wigs, how to care for his gowns, and how to prepare his accessories. She worked before and after the show with all of his materials, and stayed side stage through each performance for quick costume changes. Laurie was a willing and compliant assistant. She lapped up as much responsibility as she could find. She took on all the shopping for supplies, including makeup, wig products, pantyhose, hairbrushes, bobby pins, earrings, razors, and spirits. She kept careful track of each item's cost, before and after tax, in a book of expenditures with a photo of Craig taped on the inside cover. One container of ivory face powder cost $4.73. 2 packs of fake eyelashes cost $5.55. A carton of cigarettes and 2 lighters cost $9.72. Laurie's responsibilities also extended to getting Craig out of bed. One morning, she arrived at his apartment and found him passed out in his bedroom, nude, with his penis exposed and erect. She was embarrassed and flustered at the scene, but she had a job to do. Laurie got him dressed, nudged him into their waiting limousine, and went to work on his nails as he continued sleeping on the drive to an appearance on the television show Backstage. Craig took notice of her efforts and seriousness in building a career in the theater. He thought she was someone he could mentor. It made him feel strong. Now that she had her work as a dresser down, he told Laurie it was time she adopted a stage name to be more professional. Laurie Jenkins was far too plain for the theater world. Together they settled on the name Laurie Westman. Westman was Laurie's mother's maiden name. It also reminded Craig of his beloved Mae. The name and their pairing seemed to fit perfectly. In late July 1981, Craig and Laurie were off to Provincetown, Massachusetts for a seasonal engagement in the Madeira Room at the Pilgrim House Hotel. Provincetown has a thriving arts scene with multiple theaters, performance groups, and long-standing events. Entertainers from all over the world descend every summer, taking up residence and engagements that pack houses into the fall. The shows are so popular that some theater goers move in right alongside the actors, singers, and playwrights to watch all the theater and live entertainment they can get. Craig called it Pee-Pee Town. He had spent several summers there over the years, but now with Laurie, he had a permanent backstage crew member to support him. He couldn't have found anyone more dedicated. Laurie reported to Craig's cottage every day at noon and took care of any messages he needed handled. That included mailing replies to fan letters and shopping in markets and shops for flowers and new jewelry. She'd then go over his costumes, make alterations and repairs as needed, and give them a fresh steam cleaning. They'd take a break for dinner and then head to the theater for 2 shows nightly, with Craig performing on stage and Laurie just behind the curtain for costume changes. Laurie wanted everything to be perfect and left no detail untouched. She dressed in a tuxedo to look professional, and she made sure Craig's gowns sparkled, his wigs were perfectly set, and his costume changes were quick and efficient. She added small details for his characters, a feather boa here, a pair of sunglasses there, and hauled her mother's trunk onto the sparse stage as a prop. During the live show, she snuck away from her side stage post to blend in with the crowd and liven things up during the Q&A segment of the show. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Laurie asked Craig from the audience during the show one night. He was dressed as Mae. "Yeah, it saves a lot of time," Mae replied to audience laughter. Away from the theater, Laurie picked up Craig's housekeeping work. The two lived separately, but she took it upon herself to keep his cottage tidy and see that his linens and towels were fresh and clean. She wanted movie star treatment for her star. Craig knew what she was up to and thanked her in advance before he returned home one night with 2 men to find a freshly made bed for them to share. As much as she wanted to share a bed with him instead, Laurie was more pleased to have found his approval. With her close existence in Provincetown, Laurie grew accustomed to Craig's habits, preferences, and idiosyncrasies. She knew he preferred to eat alone, so she left him for most meals. She cleaned up his hair when he would shave his head to make wearing wigs easier. She kept a Serono Original liqueur on hand in his dressing room, knowing he liked to sip it with a cigarette between shows. One night she spilled some of the liqueur on a line of cocaine he asked her to leave for him on a compact. They licked it later at his urging. Their tongues were numb and their eyes twinkled at the rush of the drug. Craig was a frequent drug user. He believed drugs like cocaine improved his performances and made him livelier. What he hadn't yet told Laurie was that he had been diagnosed with manic depression, but had shunned prescription drugs to treat it because the downers prescribed by his doctor made it impossible to perform. This was his livelihood. He needed to focus and perform well to make his living. "With drugs, you become totally insensitive to everything but your mission," he told her years later. "You put blinkers on without regard to your personal life." A lack of regard would be the right way to describe some of Craig's behavior. Anywhere he stayed or lived was often messy and would be nearly destroyed by the end of his stay, with furniture broken, walls damaged, and linens ruined. Laurie wrote that Craig wiped soot from the fireplace all over the kitchen walls, cupboards, dishes, and glasses in his cottage that summer. He threw out a bunch of her music cassettes, and one night he melted one on the stove burner. "Evil, capital E, evil," Craig said with a laugh, imitating actress Bette Davis as he melted a tape that included actress Joan Crawford, Davis's real-life rival. Laurie didn't complain, even in her journals. When he was moody, she would remove herself from the situation. When he was angry with her, she would be hurt but take the jab at her feelings. She asked no questions and she made no demands. Laurie was a child of abuse and had lived through years of physical trauma. She was almost immune to pain.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?